Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with our host, Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
WCAT Radio proudly presents I Thought You'd Like to Know This, which is a very interesting program bringing you outstanding personalities who may have a message for you. And tonight we have a very illustrious guest. His name is Dr. Gregory Popcak. He's the founder and executive director of the Pastoral Solutions Institute, an organization dedicated to helping Catholics find faith-filled solutions to tough marriage, family, and personal problems. He's an internationally recognized expert on the practical applications of St. John Paul II's theology of the body to marriage, family, and personal issues. I love his profile, but we'll talk more about that later. So here he is. Welcome, Dr. Greg Popcak.
Thanks for having me, Bob. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And I thought we'd start out with finding out a little bit about your background. Now, you were a cradle Catholic?
Yes, I was raised in the church. But I would have to say the most formative aspect of my growing up was being raised essentially in the charismatic renewal. I was born in 1967 in Pittsburgh, where actually the renewal started on Duquesne University's campus in Pittsburgh, and my parents were involved. And then they started taking me to prayer meetings when I was about 4 or 5 years old, and my mom was frustrated because no other parents were bringing their children, and she felt that the prayer should be something that families did. And so she went to the ministry leader and said, you guys ought to have something for kids. And he said, great, next week you can start something. So she started a children's ministry, and I kind of went through what they call Life in the Spirit seminar at a very early age, before my first confession even, and it really took. I had a very powerful experience of God, and really kind of blew me away, and so I went up, through all the different sacraments, just really having a kind of a deep, kind of personal, emotional connection to what I was experiencing in those sacraments, and just kind of spent the rest of my life trying to figure out exactly what was going on by studying and learning about the faith. Yeah, so it's a little bit of a different story, but it's the faith has always been very powerful and very important to me, and even in those times whenever I've struggled and had my doubts and frustrations with the church, just like everybody else, I would always hear in my head those words from the apostles, Lord, you have the words of everlasting life. To whom shall we go? I knew that the church was the church, the place that I was going to receive God in the most powerful and personal way, and so I had to stick with it, even in those times when I did feel frustrated or struggled with my own doubts. So it's been.
Well, now myself, I was baptized in the Holy Spirit in 1981.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so you're not as old as I am, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But what is, of course, the thing happened at Duquesne in 1968. So what year was that when you
it would have been 73, 74, somewhere there.
73, so it was right in there, huh?
Yep.
That's beautiful.
In fact, Tom Mangan was Dave Mangan's brother. Dave Mangan was one of the original people at the Ark and the Dove, the retreat center where the Charismatic Renewal was started, and Tom was Dave's brother, and he was actually the leader of our prayer group in Pittsburgh.
Wow!
Tom started the children's ministry.
Don't you love Dave Mangan? I never met his brother. I didn't. Yeah, terrific. I mean, the whole group, Detroit, I mean, what a center, huh? What a center of icons, really, I call them. But so then you went to high school, and you were in Pittsburgh then, huh?
I was, yeah. Actually, I was pretty sure from second grade on that I was going to be a priest. So I kind of held on to that through high school, and I considered other possibilities, and I dated, and all that, but underneath it all, I was pretty sure I was going to end up in the seminary. And after I graduated high school, I did actually go to St. Paul's Seminary in Pittsburgh, where actually now Cardinal Wuerl was the rector, Father Donald Wuerl then, and I was part of his vocations team. He would go around and preach at different parishes, and the seminarians would be providing the music for the liturgy, and so he taught a couple of the classes at the seminary. So I had good formation there as well. But then after that first year of my freshman year of college, I really discerned that I wasn't called to the priesthood, that I wanted to be in ministry of some sort, but I realized that there are lots of different ways to minister. That hadn't actually occurred to me before that point. And so I ended up at Franciscan University, where I finished my undergraduate degree in psychology and theology at that time.
Now, how did you start into writing then?
Well, I was in practice for a couple of years in a regular private practice in Weirton, West Virginia, which is right across the river from Steubenville, where I live now.
Right.
And I had been doing some writing at the time. At the time, desktop publishing was the big thing. It was the new fad. Everybody and their uncle had a zine of some sort or another. And so I was doing some writing for some different parenting zines that were out at the time. And there was a guy, you might even know him, his name is Mike Aquilina. I call him the Six.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, see, I call him 6 Degrees of Aquilina because absolutely everybody knows him. But he actually read some of the stuff that I'd written, and at the time he was the editor of New Covenant magazine, which was a big charismatic publication, and it was published by Our Sunday Visitor. And he liked the articles and had me start writing for a New Covenant. And then Greg Erlinson, who was the publisher of OSV, read those articles and asked me to do my first book, which was For Better Forever, A Catholic Guide to Lifelong Marriage, which originally came out in 1999, and now is in its second edition. That was just revised in 2014. So that's been going strong for quite a while. But that was the first book, and that was really the thing that started it all, because, like I said, I was in private practice at the time, and that book came out, and I started getting calls from Catholics all over the country looking for faithful resources to turn to when they, in times of trouble, both for their marriage and family lives as well as their personal lives. And I didn't have any place to send them. So I thought, well, I'll try to do some work over the telephone. Let's see what happens with that. And that'll be my little gig for the church. I'll do a couple of sessions on the side here. And, within 6 months, I closed my face-to-face practice because I was getting so many calls from people all over the world by that time. And I started going into Catholic pastoral telecounseling from that time forward. And it's just grown since then. Now we have 7 counselors working full-time, seeing upwards of 40 clients a week, over 12,000 sessions a year altogether with Catholic couples, families, individuals all over the world. So our mission is really to apply the principles of Pope St. John Paul the Great's theology of the body to the challenges of everyday marriage, family, and personal life, and really also advance the cause of a Catholic integrated approach to psychotherapy. Now,
when did you get connected with Saint Sebastian? I mean,
you got a promotion.
Steubenville.
Oh, with Steubenville or with Holy Apostles?
Steubenville, yeah.
Well, I like I said, I went there as my freshman year of college. So I left the seminary at St. Paul's in Pittsburgh, and I went to Steubenville in my sophomore year. And then that's actually where I met my wife, Lisa, who's the co-host of our radio program, More to Life, that airs on EWTN, and she's a co-author of several of our books. And so we met there my junior year. We got engaged after 2 months, which was insane, and got married exactly a year later, the day after graduation. And 29 years later, we're going strong.
Wow. That's
we don't
beautiful.
do anything by halves around here.
Really?
Yeah.
So, but you're on the faculty now at Steubenville.
I'm on adjunct faculty at Franciscan, but I'm on the I'm now the program director of the MAPS program, the Masters in Pastoral Studies program at Holy Apostles College and Seminary.
Right. I wanted to talk about that a little bit because now is this your first year?
It is. Yeah, actually, around this time last year, Dr. Daniel Ben Slyke got in touch with me because he was looking for someone to teach a methods in counseling course, and it needed to be developed, so he asked if I'd be interested in doing that, and one thing led to another. We started talking, and I agreed to do the course, but I also, in looking at the course catalog, just really felt like there were lots of different ways that the program could grow and do even more to be able to be a blessing to the church and to help prepare future leaders in the church. And so in the course of our conversations with Dr. Ben Slyke and then Dr. Mahfood and others as well, Dr. Tulin, it finally got up to Father Mosey, who of course is the president of the college. And and so one thing led to another, and I was offered a few months ago the opportunity to be the program director of the MAPS program, the Masters in Pastoral Studies program, which is going to a fully online format, and we're very excited about that.
In fact, I just finished a program with one of the graduates of the Pastoral Studies program, who has a Master's of Arts in that program, and he has started a radio program called Bereavement Miracles. And what he did, he had been in AA for 30 years, I think, and he set up a 12-step program for bereavement people. And it's very interesting. And these are all distance learning programs, right?
Yes. And the MAPS program is a distance learning program. And people might wonder, well, what is pastoral studies exactly? Is it theology? Is it ministry? And I guess the answer to that would be yes. It is theology and ministry. It's really all about exploring more effective ways to communicate the teachings of our church in a manner that actually resonates with the lived experience of the faithful. And it's also about the studying the science of accompaniment, if you will. Pope Francis talks a lot about accompaniment, the ways that we are to be with others, especially who are struggling, and to walk with them in ways that lead them into a deeper experience of their faith and a deeper encounter with the Lord. But that's complicated, and the reality is there's a lot of really good science that talks about what does healthy accompaniment look like. How can we move people from that place of suffering that they're in to the place where they can be open and receptive to God's grace more and to His healing more. And so that's what pastoral studies is really all about, understanding and exploring ways to communicate the deeper truths of our faith in a manner that it really kind of gets to the heart of things, but also learning how to truly accompany people in effective ways that lead them both to healing and a personal encounter with Christ.
Well, he really got set on fire, that's for sure, because and putting that program together, and he has a Bereavement Miracles workbook, and that was such a beautiful thing that happened to him, and how he's passing it along now to these people that have lost their loved ones. And
ministry.
It is. It's really something. And so I was excited when I heard that you were going to be the new director.
Well, I was excited too.
Now, what about at Franciscan? What's your role there?
Well, like I said, I have been on the adjunct faculty, so that means basically an outside professor kind of coming in to teach one class a semester. In the past, I've taught courses in the sociology and psychology departments. I taught Christianity and Society, which was a sociology course that looked at basically how our faith is communicated to society. And then I also taught one of my favorite classes, Spirituality and the Helping Professions, which was all about having a spiritually integrated approach to counseling and psychotherapy. And then in the graduate theology department, I taught pastoral and spiritual direction, where we really focused in on helping people develop the skills that were necessary to enter into a spiritual direction and the sort of the mystical theology tradition of the church.
I love your profile here. It says that since 2001, you and your wife have, like you mentioned, have hosted several nationally syndicated call-in radio advice programs, including Heart, Mind, and Strength. Is that still on Ave Maria?
No, actually, we retooled that program probably 2010 or 11, and it's not. It's still on the air, but it's a different name, different format, and it's
More to Life. Is that the
Life.
one?
That's
More
right.
to Life.
That's
yeah.
right.
Okay.
So More to Life.
And then
Incarnation.
And Fully Alive on Sirius.
Yes, for about 3 years we ran both programs. So at the time, Heart, Mind, and Strength was on at noon, and Fully Alive was on at from 10 to midnight weekdays on the Catholic channel, which is Sirius 129, one click down from where I am now. So we did that for about 3 years, and that was tough going, I got to say, being on the radio split like that. So after about 3 years, we decided to take a break from that, but we continued doing Heart, Mind, and Strength. Until we retooled it, like I said, in about 2010 or 11, and it became More to Life, which is really all about unpacking the teachings of Pope St. John Paul and really applying the ideas of the theology of the body to challenges of everyday life. So that program has been going since then, and just as of this past August 15th, actually, the Feast of the Assumption, we were picked up by the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. So we're on somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 terrestrial Catholic radio stations, and then Sirius XM 130 now, with the one up from where we used to be.
And interesting that you've been on Fox News, NPR, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, Ladies' Home Journal, and the National Enquirer.
National Enquirer, there you go. That one was a surprise. Yeah, I came home with a voicemail message from a reporter from the National Enquirer. I was wondering what I'd done. But I had a book come out. It's still out, actually. It's my one secular title called The Exceptional 7%, 9 Secrets of the World's Happiest Couples. And so he wanted to interview me about that. So that book, that interview was published right below a story about, I want to say, it was a story about Joan Crawford or something like that. But anyway. Coming back from the dead or something, I don't remember now. But yeah, that was a hoot, I got to say.
Tell us about the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia.
Right. Well, yeah, my wife and I, Lisa and I, were honored to be featured breakout speakers at the 2015 World Meeting of Families. And I also was given the honor of introducing Bishop Barron at the inaugural talk for the opening ceremonies of the World Meeting as well. So that was really exciting. I think I was probably more excited to introduce Bishop Barron than I was to do our own talk. But the talk went really very well. It was specifically focusing on what we like to refer to as the kind of the marks of the Catholic family. What are the things that really make a Catholic family able to live out the faith as fully as possible in their home, without it on the one hand being oppressive, or on the other hand, just sort of being a footnote. How do you really live that Catholic difference in family life? And so we really looked at that throughout the course of the talk, and it was very well received. It was a wonderful experience. The whole week was just tremendous. We really loved being there, and it was an honor to be invited.
Tell us about this Harold Abel School of Behavioral Health. You say it's at Capella University?
Yeah, Capella University is a for-profit online college university, and so I teach for them in their doctoral program of human services. So it's a PhD program in human services counseling, and I teach a bunch of highfalutin courses like epistemology of practice knowledge. Which is just basically how do you know what you know in practice, and how do you know that the information you're relying on to treat people is actually good information. So that's the one course I teach for them there. But I've been with them since 2008.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your work in theology of the body? You work with Christopher West, or
we're colleagues, yeah, and friends, good friends actually. We blurb each other's books, and he sends a lot of clients our way, and we really have a lot of our families are close. But we haven't studied together or anything like that. We grew up in different ways. But the theology of the body, actually I was introduced to the theology of the body when I was still at Franciscan University as an undergrad Dr. Alan Schreck, who is the author of books. The Catholic and Christian is one of the big ones. He said, he's got over a dozen books at this point, I'm sure. But he at the time that I was there, the theology of the body was kind of brand new, and so he was still teaching an introductory course on TOB, and that was the first time I encountered it. And just in the course of kind of learning more about it and reflecting on it on my own, that's what really led me to take the approach toward marriage and family life that my wife and I take personally, as well as that we try to articulate in our books. Because the thing about theology of the body, it's not new in the sense that it's presenting some new Christian teaching or new revelation of the gospel. I mean, Christianity is what it is, and the things that Jesus taught are the things Jesus taught, and the received treasure of the church is what the church gives us. But the theology of the body gives us a lens that allows us to see, kind of cut to the heart of the gospel, if you will, if that's the way Christopher West puts it. And in the course of 2,000 years of being around, the church has picked up some things that can sometimes be a distraction for people. That's not that they're bad things. It's just that sometimes those things can be overemphasized in ways that aren't necessarily healthy or appropriate. And the theology of the body helps put all of that into a perspective that allows us to really live the heart of the gospel in a dynamic and exciting way that really, I think, helps us rediscover what Christ was trying to do, both in our hearts and in society, by calling us into deeper communion with Him and with each other.
Well, I heard it's one of his first presentations in the Cincinnati area when he got started, and that just blew me away.
Christopher, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, he does amazing work. Yeah, we first connected actually around my book, For Better Forever. He was still the family life director for the Archdiocese of Denver at the time, and we started.
Oh, okay.
My publisher sent him a review copy of my book, and he actually called me to say, I've read a lot of books on marriage, but you're the only person I've read that actually gets it. And so I knew I liked that guy. So we started a good friendship from that point forward. But so he's a great guy.
Really, and in Cincinnati, there they have a pretty strong program going there in one section of Cincinnati there.
They do. It's called Rural Woods, actually. Believe it or not, my son Jacob lives in Cincinnati now. He's actually the co-host of EWTN's Sunrise Morning Show, which originates out of Sacred Heart Radio in Cincinnati. So he's plugged into the Catholic community there. Yeah, it's called Rural Woods. It's a practice that's rooted in the theology of the body. And they're a good group.
So your son is on with one of the family, the girl that's on there. What's her name again?
Anna Mitchell.
Anna Mitchell, yeah. And she married into one of the family that's I'm very close to.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, and can you share with us any real success stories in your work through the years here with what you're doing in this counseling?
Yeah, every day is its own success story in a sense that you're able to walk with people and really bring them one step closer to where they need to be. I was talking with somebody the other day actually, who, now that you mention it, who was sharing that they were able to really see themselves in a very different way than when they first came to sessions. When they first came in, they were struggling with depression. They'd been through some traumatic history, being abused growing up, and really have a very hard time accepting that they could be loved by anybody, really, and really lived a fairly solitary life. They were successful in their work, and they put all their energy into work. But through the course of our work together, this person started opening up to new friendships, became active in their parish, actually is starting a dating relationship now for the first time. And so, to be able to see the kind of impact that you're able to have in a person's life, it's truly inspiring and humbling. For example, I got an email the other day from a listener to our radio program. And it was funny. It started out with a backhanded compliment. She said, Dr. Greg and Lisa, I have to say I've been listening to your show for a long time, and at first I used to turn it off all the time because it was just too painful to listen to. I was like, wow, that's horrible, but thanks for writing about that. But she went on to say, but the more I listened to it, the more I came to realize that the vision of marriage that you were describing, wasn't just made up, that it was for real, and that I was settling for too little in my relationship. And a reason it was painful was because I didn't want to believe that God wanted to give me more in my marriage. And I finally decided that I needed to try to live out what the church was teaching in marriage, and I told my husband that we need to get some help. And he's coming with me to counseling, and for the first time in our marriage in 20 years, I feel like I've got some hope. And I mean, that was mind-blowing. I mean, again, I wasn't counseling her. I was just my wife and I were just doing our radio program. But through the course of the relationship we were able to build up with this woman over time, God touched her heart, and He used our ministry to do it, and that's really what it's all about for me. Letting God use the gift He's given me to try to bring people closer to Him.
That's beautiful. I was thinking as you were saying that back about 30 years ago, someone shared a prophecy at our prayer meeting, and it was, raise your expectations, that God wants to do so much, and we expect so little.
Mm-hmm.
You come to me, he says, with your little thimbles or your little Dixie cups, and I want to shower you with buckets. And that's the way I'm looking at your ministry here, man. You've got stuff here. God just wants to shower these people, right?
Well, yeah, and that's one of the reasons we call our show More to Life. The idea that I believe...
Yeah, there it is.
Through the theology of the body, especially, God is reminding the whole church that there's more than we're settling for, that we've become too complacent, that we've taken our cue from what the culture tells us we should be and how the culture tells us we should live, and God wants to wake us up and say, stop settling, in a sense. That doesn't mean, by the way, that He wants to give us all $1 million and a yacht and a second house in
No.
It means that He wants to open up our hearts and fill our hearts with the love that this world can't give, and satisfy the desires of our hearts with His grace. And that's not just in some airy-fairy heaven, in the next life. Not that I'm knocking heaven, don't get me wrong, but I mean even right now. Father John Riccardo, for example, has a new book out called Heaven Starts Now, and he of course is very well regarded in the theology of the body circles. And his point by saying that is, we start cooperating with God's grace now, and that encounter with God's grace allows heaven to be experienced in small ways this side of heaven. And when we open up our hearts to that, we start seeing with God's eyes what we could be. Pope St. John Paul used to say, become what you are. And that always sounded like kind of a weird Zen sort of thing to say. But in truth, what it means is when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we're often disappointed by what we see. We're often disappointed by the broken, fallen mess that's staring back at us. But God, when He looks at us, He doesn't see that. He sees everything He created us to be, and that is what we are. Bob, when you look at your kid, you don't just see what they are right now. You see all the things that child could be when they grow up, all the things that child will be when they grow up, all the strengths and skills and abilities they have that they can't even necessarily see inside themselves. And that's who they are. And they're going to spend their lives growing into that. And God the Father looks at us and He sees the same thing in His children. And we're going to spend our lives becoming what we are, what God sees when He looks at us. And so when you say, that we tend to settle and that God has more for us, that's how I take that to mean that, God wants to make us into saints. He wants to make our relationships, our marriages and families lights to the world that remind the whole world that this kind of love that's free and total and faithful and fruitful and doesn't fail is real, and for those children who come to Him and really live according to His Word, it can be theirs.
When you mentioned Father John Riccardo, it's just been wonderful to watch him grow. I met him when he was 18 in Detroit, and he was just getting started, but he was a product of the charismatic renewal.
Yeah, whatever you say about the charismatic renewal, God used it in mighty ways, and is still using it in mighty ways to bring change in the church. Yeah.
Yeah. What can you say about him? He's dynamic, right?
Oh, he's a great guy. He actually was a regular contributor to our program. He's busy, so it was hard to to keep him on. But he was for the first 6 months or so since we were on EWTN, he was a regular contributor. So it was great to have him.
Yeah, well, he is busy, that's for sure. Well, let's talk about some of your books then. Let's see, you wanted to talk, I know, about this book that really got people's attention, like you said, and has been your most successful effort, and that's the book called Holy Sex. And what it says on the cover, a Catholic guide to toe-curling, mind-blowing, infallible loving.
There you go. Holy Sex, a Catholic guide to toe-curling, mind-blowing, infallible loving. Yeah, I wanted to get some people's attention and shake things up with that one. And I have. It's been wonderful. God's really used the book in tremendous ways. Honestly, I expected to be crucified. The book. Yeah, well, because it's a shocking title, and I take a kind of in-your-face approach to the whole book because I was kind of inspired by, well, obviously the theology of the body, but Pope Benedict said something later on, it was after the book was out, but he talked about how the world sees the Catholic Church as the Church of no. Don't do this, don't do that, no to this, no to that. We need to be the Church of yes, that shows people there's a different way, a better way. And our culture is saturated in sex. Every song is about sex. Every story is about sex. Every movie is about sex. And we can sort of cluck about that and go hide under a rock, or we can embrace it and say, you know what? God gave sex to the godly. The first command He gave humankind was go forth and multiply, and He wasn't given math homework, boys and girls. And so, how do we as Christian people confront that reality and say, you know what? God has a plan for this thing that you're fascinated with. Let's talk about what that plan really is and show you how, again, as Pope Benedict says, that eros, when it's united with grace, can be an experience that leads us in ecstasy toward the divine. What an incredible statement that somehow eros, erotic love, is supposed to lead us in ecstasy toward the divine. Now, he goes on to say, but that calls for a path of ascent and sacrifice and generosity and love. So, it's not just to have lots of sex and get close to God. There's more to it than that. But we have the real truth about what sex is. Why not proclaim that from the rooftops? And so that's what I wanted to do. Get people's attention and say, you know what, let's look at the truth about Catholic sexuality and stop being ashamed of it.
Now, some people would say many people are either unaware or outright rejecting of the Church's teaching on sexuality. Why doesn't the Church just cut its losses and move on?
Well, one thing that people don't realize, and actually this came up a lot during Pope John Paul's pontificate, the way a lot of people put it was, why is he so concerned with what they call pelvic issues? Why is he so upset, with sex and pelvic issues? And why does he get on with the important stuff, about feeding the poor and doing a just society and all those things? And those are important things. I'm not knocking that, right? I mean, that's really important stuff. But here's why Pope John Paul II was so concerned with sexuality. As the first pope whose pontificate was entirely in after Vatican II. Of course, there was Pope John Paul I, but he was only around for a month. So Pope John Paul II was the first pope whose pontificate was entirely after Vatican II. One of the geniuses of the Second Vatican Council was this idea of the universal call to holiness. Prior to Vatican II, there was sort of this perception that marriage was the also-ran sacrament. It was the sacrament for the rest of us. If you really wanted to be holy, you'd be a priest or in religious life. Vatican II really challenged that idea head-on with this idea of the universal call to holiness. Previously, there was moral theology, which was concerned with what's the basic minimum requirement for salvation that we could hold the rabble to, and then there's spiritual theology, which the religious priests and religious studied so that they could draw closer to God. After Vatican II, the doors opened up, and it was said, everybody is called to be a saint. Everyone is called to be Christian heroes, and so in that context, Pope St. John Paul the Great started looking at, well, what does a lay spirituality really look like? What does it mean for a lay person to be called to holiness? And if you look at it, the lay vocation is entirely tied up in our sexuality. Our entire lives are consumed with finding a mate, keeping a mate, loving that mate, deciding when to have children, how many children to have, raising those children to be loving people, teaching those children how they can find healthy mates and keep those mates. It's all about sexuality. Any lay spirituality that's divorced from sexuality is essentially dead. It's a whited sepulcher that looks all shiny and pious on the outside, but is really empty and hollow on the inside. So he started to say, Pope John Paul II in his Theology of the Body, started talking about, here is the way for lay people to become holy, to bring their sexuality, their ability to give themselves to each other, to God, and to let God renew that, so that marriage could have the sacramental power it's meant to have, because marriage, of course, is the sacrament of sexuality. It's not the sacrament of doing dishes together, it's the sacrament of sex, where marriage redeems our sexuality and redeems the way man and woman give themselves to each other, so that we can more powerfully image the Trinity itself, that loving communion that is a life-giving love to the world. That's all really heady, big stuff, but that's the point. That it's not just about pelvic issues. It's not just this little side thing that people are, the church is obsessed with. The church is obsessed with holiness. The church is obsessed with you becoming a saint. And for a lay person to become a saint, we need to bring our sexuality to God and say, teach us how to use this gift for your good. Because if we don't know how to use that, then if we get sex wrong, then we get marriage wrong. If we get marriage wrong, we get family life wrong. If we get family life wrong, we get society wrong. And you can see that just by looking at the news. You can see what's happened in the last even 10 years after the sexual revolution, and we've been living sexuality wrong for so many years. It's all because we don't get a proper godly sense of sexuality.
And you mentioned you mentioned that distinction, what you called holy sex, and then there's eroticism. Right. And I think you've pretty well discussed that situation, but maybe is there anything more you can say?
Actually, no. Here's the problem. When the church says these crazy things I just said about sex, people are really put off by it. They either laugh it off and think that's ridiculous. Why is the church making such a big deal out of this? Or they're offended. They're really offended because, oh my gosh, how could you say something like that about something as base and and whatever, as disgusting even as sex, this basic bodily function. Why would you do that? And so here's the problem: when the church talks about sex, the world hears eroticism. In the book of Galatians, St. Paul lists a whole bunch of things that you won't see people of faith indulging in. And one of those things he calls eroticism in certain translations. So what I did was I made a distinction in the book between what I call holy sex, which is all the things I was just describing to you, versus eroticism, which is essentially glorified friction. They both feel good. Holy sex and eroticism both feel good, but where holy sex is life-giving, eroticism causes death and disease. Where holy sex makes us free to be vulnerable with each other and truly love each other, eroticism makes us suspicious of each other and shut down. Where holy sex gives life and is open to life, eroticism is terrified of pregnancy and treats fertility as a disease. Where holy sex is about bonding two people together for life, eroticism says, let me use you for now, and so on and so forth. So people's experience when they think about sex is actually one of eroticism. And I think we need to do a better job as a church of helping people understand that when we talk about sex, we're not talking about what they think is sex. We're talking about an entirely different reality that's as different as night is from day. If you will, holy sex is the gold to eroticism's fool's gold. Holy sex is the diamond to eroticism's cubic zirconium. It's a knockoff. And so we need to help educate the consumer, if you will, in the marketplace, what the difference is that we're talking about when we talk about sex. Because for the church to continue to talk about sex the way it does to a world that thinks that sex is the same thing as eroticism is a fool's errand because they have no idea what we're talking about. So we need to define our terms. So I do that in the front of the book where I explain what is the difference between these two realities and how do you move from that mindset that's soaked in eroticism to one that is open to holy sex.
You're a brave man.
Yeah, like I said, I expected to get crucified for this, but in honesty, with a few notable exceptions, the book has been extremely well received. You were asking about what stories do I have from my work. I never expected this book to have the impact that it had for bringing people back into the church. I had a I had a woman come up to me, and it was actually at a Catholic homeschooling conference, and she said to me, she was a homeschooling mom of 6, right? And she said, my boyfriend and I were living together. And my mom was all upset about it because she was Catholic, and she just didn't, she kept after me. I said, yeah, Mom, whatever, whatever. And she gave me your book, Holy Sex, and I said,
wow.
Oh, great, thanks, Mom. And I let it sit there on the floor in the bathroom. By the way, if anybody ever wants to get your husband to read a book, leave it in the bathroom, take everything else out. But she left she left on the floor in the bathroom, and so one day she was in there, and she picked it up and started reading it. And she said, I couldn't put it down, and I kept reading it. And I realized by the end of the book that God wanted me to have a different kind of relationship and a different kind of life than I had. And I went to my boyfriend, and we started talking, and we started praying together, and then we went to church together, and then one thing led to another, and this Catholic homeschooling mother of 6 was standing in front of me as a result of what she read in Holy Sex. And I was I'm tearing up as I'm telling the story. I was blown away. Because it never occurred to me that the book could have that kind of impact. But of course it can, because as I said to you just a few minutes ago, when you really understand God's plan for our sexuality, then it rightly orders our relationships. It rightly orders our life. It gets us back into that path to authentic holiness, instead of just treating our faith and the pursuit of holiness as this sort of side venture that we do when we go to church, but then we check at the door when we leave the church. So it's been powerful. I've been really, really blessed through this.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That it's so important to have books like this available because people are, learn these other things from movies, and I heard of a couple of, one friend of mine, this girl, said she was having a discussion with her husband. They were kind of having an argument, and he says, well, Jules, remember how it was in that movie?
Right.
He was using the movie for his reasoning.
Sure, and we often do, But I will say this. Here's the thing I want to say about that, though. I think that the way to make progress on that is not necessarily by going to people and kind of criticizing the Hollywood version of sex and saying, oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, I know.
What we need to do is say what we've got is even better. Because there's something good about it. When people are attracted to those images in the movies or television or even pornography, for that matter, God forbid, they see something that their hearts want. Now it's twisted, obviously, it's twisted terribly, especially in pornography. But they're attracted to something there. They're attracted to people who are comfortable with their bodies, or at least giving the illusion of that. They're attracted to this idea of connection with another person. And what we can say is, that eroticism thing you're looking at in Hollywood or in pornography or whatever, that's sort of like Las Vegas. It's big flashy lights, get you in the front door with promises of $1.99 roast beef and all you can eat buffets and lots of women.
Yeah.
And then it dumps you out the back end a lot poorer for the experience. That's eroticism. But here I have an experience that's even better. I have an experience of holy sex, right, which is like a cathedral or a symphony or an art museum where you go in and it really doesn't cost you that much on the front end. And what it does, though, is it elevates you. It brings you to a new place. It raises you to new heights. And so, yes, what you're longing for, what you're looking for is good, and I'm not going to criticize you for being drawn to that. But I'm going to show you that if you want to get that need met, here's the place to do it. And that's where the holy sex comes in, because it really satisfies the desires of our hearts. We don't repress those; we re-express those in godly and graceful ways.
You talk about pornography. I interviewed a man the other day, a couple of weeks ago. It had got into drugs and pornography and things like that and when he was in high school. And he was in it for, I think, 30 years. And he would watch pornography from 7 o'clock Friday morning till 8 o'clock Sunday night in his apartment. You know, that's all he did. And he was so depressed and so forth. And to show you how God uses everything, he and his brother somehow got to this movie, The Passion of Christ. And when there was a scene where Jesus was coming out of the cave, I don't remember the scene myself, but it just grabbed this guy. He just somehow it just got a hold of him, and that was the beginning of his conversion.
It's amazing. God reaches us out. It reaches us in some dramatic and sometimes traumatic, but dramatic ways, and often in ways we least expect.
And your book, you know, how your book was used in such a powerful way there.
Well, you know, and I'll share another story briefly, if you don't mind. I was at the Society for Catholic Social Sciences in Brooklyn, Queens, at St. John's University, and I was actually speaking about this book, Holy Sex. And I was I had a few minutes before the talk, so I was just going over my notes in the hotel bar, and it was me and one other guy who was attending the conference, and that was it. We were the only two people in the restaurant bar. And the waitress came over and, you know, started talking, and she saw that she said, "So what are you speaking on?" I said, "You really want to know?" And she said, "Yeah. What are you speaking on?" I said, "Well, I'm doing a talk called Holy Sex: The Catholic Guide to Mind-Blowing, Toe-Curling, Infallible Loving." And she just sort of looked at me and said, "Can Catholics even do that? Is that okay?" And then she went away. You know, we laughed. She went away. She came back. She brought, you know, whatever. And then she says, "You know, so what's that all about?" And I started telling her the stuff about eroticism versus holy sex that I was just sharing with you. She said, "Oh, that's interesting." And then she walked away. Then she came back with a refill, you know, iced tea, and then said,
"Yeah.
So, you know, I'm living with my boyfriend, and I don't know. I always kind of wanted to get married, but he doesn't really want to, and I don't know. I guess, you know." And I said, "Well, you know, that's kind of what this book's all about. You know, just really seeing what you're worth in God's eyes, and how, you know, He wants so much more for you than very often we settle for. And, you know, there's this longing in your heart for marriage, and you know, you're frustrated right now because you're not getting that, and God wants to give you more than what you're settling for right now." And she said, "Wow, I never really thought of it that way." And then she went away and came back, and it was just us, me, my friend, and this waitress in this bar talking about holy sex, and it was touching her heart because it was speaking to the fact that she was desiring longing and communion. And settling for so much less, and we were able to show her that there's a better way. Now, you know, that was the only encounter I ever had with her. I don't know what happened, but I like to think that God used that moment to plant some seeds, and I know that God's using this book to plant a whole harvest in people's hearts.
That's beautiful. I'm putting some things on my Christmas list right now, including that book, Holy Sex. Really. Okay, why do people have such a negative view of the church when it comes to sexuality?
Well, you know, as I was sharing with you before, I think Pope Benedict said it best when he said that people tend to look at the church as the church of the big no. You know, they think of us as the figure waggers, or Dana Carvey's old church lady character on SNL. You know,
yeah.
Isn't that special? You know. And that's how we often come across. And, you know, to be fair, I mean, you know, that's not entirely made up. You know, there's a big stream of that in the church even. In fact, it's a heresy that's gone under different names throughout the centuries: Manichaeism, Jansenism. But basically what that heresy is that grew up along the side of Christianity is the belief in a sort of dualistic world where there's a good spirit and a bad body. And that pleasure is bad because it could possibly be abused, therefore we must avoid it all. And, you know, this idea of Jansenism. Bishop Jansen was a French bishop who kind of tried to out-Calvin the Calvinists, you know, in saying that pleasure was just, you know, bad, essentially, and that you should never go to communion in your life, and that, you know, and it really caught on. In a lot of France. Well, Ireland was sending its seminarians to France at that time, and Irish seminarians got infected with this Jansenism. this very punitive kind of scrupulous attitude towards spirituality and this sort of condemnatory nature of the outlook on the body. And Ireland then became infected with this, and of course, then during the big immigration, American Catholicism became infected with this whole strain of Jansenism, and in fact, and Western Christianity in general. And I think one of the reasons that Pope St. John Paul the Great gave us the theology of the body was to combat this virus that was growing in the church, that was causing us to hate the very body that God gave us to give ourselves to each other in a holy, blessed, and beautiful union. So what I was saying before, that over 2,000 years of history, the church has kind of picked up some stuff along the way, that some good, some bad, and the theology of the body gives us a lens to be able to see through the stuff that's not supposed to be there, or put other stuff in perspective and allow us to see the heart of the gospel. That's part of what I was talking about. The theology of the body allows us to sort of, with a laser, cut through the Jansenistic tendrils that have woven itself around the heart of the church and is trying to strangle the love that's at the heart of the gospel, and cut that out. And so that's why the people think of the church as this big negative thing, because they've experienced this Jansenistic approach, this body-hating, pleasure-hating, sex-hating approach to church, which is not Catholic at all. In fact, Jansenism was the heresy so nice it had to be condemned twice. 2 different popes denounced Jansenism as a heresy, but it still continues to define people's idea of what Catholicism really is. And so this book
Too bad.
that idea. Yeah.
So what guidance can you give couples who are struggling with conflict about their sexual issues in their marriage?
Well, in the book I present several what I call the pleasure principles, right? I mean, for all the nattering on about all the rules the church has, really there's one rule, that every act of intimacy should be procreative and unitive. Now, that means technically that the man needs to climax inside the woman. But that's not all there is to it. I mean, sometimes critics have gotten that far in the book and they say, well, Popcak just says that, and that Popcak doesn't say anything like that at all. What Popcak says is that, every act has to be, like the church says, unitive and procreative, and that means that at a minimum that the man needs to climax inside the woman. But beyond that, there's a whole process of forming our hearts and our consciences and our minds to reflect God's love. And I give 4 principles that I suggest that couples take to prayer and communication to be able to really live this out. And the first principle is that there should be a continuity between the daily relationship and the sexual relationship. The short version of this is, if you want a more joyful sexual relationship, you got to start by having a more joyful day-to-day marriage. If you want a more intimate sexual relationship, you got to ask yourself, how much time do we spend being emotionally intimate with each other through the day? If you want a more playful sexual relationship, you got to start by asking yourself, how much do we play with each other all day long? And then you'll have your answer, because you can't have one relationship in the bedroom and another relationship in the rest of your life, because then it's a lie. The second principle is, while you should never be afraid to explore all the permitted pleasures, you should never be tempted to see each other merely as givers and receivers of pleasure, that we must always respect the dignity of each other as persons. And the idea there is that pleasure isn't bad as long as it affirms and builds each other up. When we start seeing people as a means to the end of pleasure, that's when we start to thingify people, turn them into objects, and use them instead of building them up and loving them as human persons. And I talk about anything you do in the bedroom, or anything you wear, or the ways you talk to each other in the bedroom. It's never about that. That things should never become the primary point of the sexual relationship, but rather they should be seen as the means that you employ to experience the fullness of each other's love. In a lot of sexual arguments, couples will get into this thing, well, we didn't do that position, or you didn't say that thing, or we didn't, and it becomes all about that one thing, and they obsess about doing that thing. Sex isn't about putting on a performance or a show. It's not about doing that thing. It's about loving each other and being present to each other. That doesn't mean certain positions are bad as long as they're moral. It doesn't mean that what you do in the bedroom is you have to be all, according to Hoyle, so to speak. But you have to be loving, and you have to recognize that this is a person that I'm with, and they deserve to be respected as a person. And then finally, the last point I make in the book about this is while a lover's comfort zones shouldn't be the final arbiter in sexual disputes, what makes me comfortable or not comfortable, feelings related to comfort zones have to be respected, right? So a lover's discomfort is reason enough to delay doing something, in the bedroom, even if it's not entirely enough to completely rule it out in the future. Couples should continue to evaluate all permitted pleasures. Again, it's not talking about immoral stuff, but every once in a while, a couple will get into arguments about frequency or about, as you said, this position or that, and they're not immoral things, they're just preferences. The rule there, of course, is generosity, self-donation, opening ourselves up to be more and more vulnerable to each other. But that's also scary. So we have to be patient with each other and loving to each other and continue revisiting the conversation, not just saying, no, I'm not going to do that because I don't feel comfortable, but also not saying, well, you better do that if you love me. And so we get past that polarized argument and really start to enter into a deeper communion about, well, what does it mean to you that we do this? And how can I help you get past that discomfort by loving you better and more, and so on. I unpack those principles in the book, but they're just basic principles for informing people's prayerful discernment about how to live out their sexuality around this prudential matters in marriage.
What you were saying earlier is like, for example, the way we treat our wives in just everyday activities is kind of like foreplay, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's there was an old book called "Sex Begins in the Kitchen," and the point was basically that what I was saying in that first pleasure principle, that we have a tendency to separate our sexual selves, our sexual lives, from the rest of our life. We have a tendency to think that I close the bedroom door and I'm a different person now, and that's not how it works. That might be how eroticism works. I close the bedroom door and I put on a persona and I pretend to be something, and you pretend to be something, and we pretend together. But you know what? That gets old, and it gets boring, and soon, at some point that dies. And a lot of people talk about how their sex life dies in marriage. They had a great sex life before they got married, and it died in marriage. Well, that's why, because they were pretending. But now married sex is about real love. It's about real life. And you have to recognize that what goes on in your everyday life is going to be carried with you into the bedroom. And if that's a mess, then you're going to have a mess in the bedroom too. So it's all about asking yourselves, how do you love and serve and care for each other all day long? And if you want to have a more passionate, vital, playful, intimate, vulnerable sex life, you have to have a more passionate, vital, intimate, vulnerable marriage life in general. And that's how sex then leads to holiness, because my desire for that communion makes me want to do the hard work of opening up not just my body, but my heart and my soul to my spouse.
That's beautiful. When we were talking about you being crucified, how's Christopher West doing? He ran into some strong persecution early on, didn't he? He
did, and we've both taken our lumps along the way. But but it's all resolved really quite well. People see the truth in it, and it's a little disturbing. For example, I was talking with Dr. Sebastian Mahfoud before the show, and he was referring to Alice von Hildebrand criticized my book Holy Sex as part of a larger criticism of Christopher West's work. But I mean, and I love Dr. Alice very much, and her work, of course, and her husband's work, Dietrich. But what she admitted in the interview was she actually never read the book. She got as far as the title and was kind of put off by it, and then kind of criticized it. And then on top of that, when people, and in a subsequent interview, when they asked her, well, what do you think about the theology of the body? She said, well, I never read the theology of the body, but I know enough about it because it was based on my husband's work. Well, I mean, to some degree that's true, but you really can't criticize something adequately if you haven't bothered to take the time to read it and understand it. So, that's kind of been the case for all the people who've criticized my work or Christopher's work. They pick up a line here, they pick up a sentence there, they pick up a snap from YouTube, and they say, oh my gosh, Popcak said this, West said that, and they go off to town and write articles on the internet to slam us. And, whatever. The truth is when you sit down and you actually look at what the theology of the body says, what our books teach, it's completely consistent with the church, and, more importantly, it changes hearts.
And we're out of time, and we certainly appreciate your being with us on this program. Dr. Greg Popcak, who is a new director of Master of Arts in the Pastoral Studies program at Holy Apostles. and we kind of gave people there, Holy Apostle, a little introduction to you. I think we know you better now.
Yeah, I really downloaded a lot of stuff there. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Really? It was great. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Bob.
And we'll hope to see you again sometime.
Amen.
And in the meantime, may God bless every one of us in the name of Jesus, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.